These childhood movies scarred an entire generation. I have a theory. Kids today, they're a lot more protected when it comes to media in some ways. They have absolutely no idea how terrifying children's movies used to be. Seriously, somewhere along the way, studios decided kids should be protected from anything even remotely upsetting. Take a look at the most recent Pixar movie, Hoppers, where they kind of had to re-edit some stuff to make it less like a horror film. It's still actually quite scary at moments, but I remember a lot of the movies when I was a kid were absolutely accidentally terrifying. Often these movies would kill beloved characters. They would also introduce nightmare creatures that haunt many of our nightmares to this day. And somehow our parents kept renting these movies thinking they were perfectly normal family entertainment. I even recently saw some controversy with the new Minions movie where they're talking about how that movie is perhaps a bit satanic, even. But when we were kids, things were a little bit more unhinged. So today I want to go ahead and revisit some of these childhood horrifying films and classics. Some of these are less scary and actually more sad. So we'll get into that probably towards the end. But first, let me introduce myself. Hey, I'm Carson, but you can call me Wetzel. Around here, I make videos about movies, games, internet history, obscure stories, and whatever fascinating rabbit hole that I happen to fall down next. If that sounds like your kind of thing, you're in the right place. So let's go ahead and get into it. I don't know about you, but I do vividly remember going to Blockbuster on Friday nights or maybe even Hollywood Video for the OGs out there. That was probably, I don't know, I feel like they had different kind of selection, like weirder movies. I remember renting the same like segment of the Transformers animated movie. It wasn't the full movie. It was just like a sequence of it, which was kind of fun. But you'd wander the aisles of the Blockbuster, Hollywood Video, whatever rental store you'd frequent, and it felt like hours before you finally convinced your parents to let you rent the movie, the one that you've been wanting that captured you. Maybe it was the poster of the movie, the title. You never know what it would be. Sometimes the movie would be exactly what you expected, but other times it would probably permanently alter your brain chemistry and create new nightmare fuel for generations to come. What's funny is that most of these movies weren't just like horror films. Like every now and then you would be able to sneak one of those in, but nobody was like, throwing The Exorcist in their backpack and sneak. I mean, maybe some of you were. That's what you go to your Uncle Tim's house for, was the secret horror movie watching. But these were movies that adults genuinely believed were appropriate for children. It looked like a kids movie. And to be fair, maybe they were appropriate, but underneath them was nightmare fuel, disturbing imagery, and emotional devastation sometimes. Despite that, I do think a lot of these movies did have something meaningful to say. Looking back now, I think that's part of why they've stuck with us. They respected kids enough to tell stories about grief, fear, death, courage, stuff that might get underlooked today in some films. Without pretending those things didn't exist, these movies just presented it to us. That doesn't mean they weren't, terrifying. They definitely were. So let's get started with what might be the biggest offender on this list. Imagine growing up watching Wizard of Oz like most of us did, and you find out there's a sequel. The Wizard of Oz did have some scary moments, but that's nothing like what you would see in Return to Oz. Disney originally released Return to Oz in 1985 with a whole new cast and story for the Wizard of Oz, continuing the franchise. And for me, I didn't watch this in theaters. I was not alive yet, but I did remember renting this, and now I own a Blu-ray copy. But it is an absolutely unhinged movie. You remember, like the Wizard of Oz, yeah, there's some scary moments, but you remember, things like the colorful munchkins and singing and the yellow brick road, and like maybe the flying monkeys would get you a little spooked. But instead, Return to Oz, the very first thing this movie gives you is Dorothy being taken to like a psychiatric hospital, and it's dark. It's dark, man. And within the first 10 minutes, she's trapped to a bed being prepared for electroshock therapy. And I'm sorry, what? If this is a Disney movie, this isn't supposed to be like a horror film, but that's how it starts. It starts with crushing reality of what would happen if you start talking about going to visit the Wizard of Oz. And from there, it only gets weirder and more bizarre. When Dorothy returns to Oz, it's gone. It's destroyed. The once magical Emerald City is now abandoned. Everyone has been turned to stone. There's almost no music. The colors are muted. It feels less like a fantasy movie and more like a post-apocalyptic horror film. As a kid, I don't think I even really understood why this felt so unsettling, but I just knew something was off. I mean, that could even be the change of actors potentially, but just the atmosphere itself was so different that it terrified me. But now let's get to the truly horrifying moment in this film, and that's when the Wheelers show up. The Wheelers look like something you would see at like Hollywood Horror Nights at Universal Studios, and I don't know, for some reason when they're making this movie, like, yes, this is perfect for family entertainment. The way they move, the laughter, the wheels, even like the screeching of the wheels, and the makeup and effects for this is horrifying, and it's really disturbing. But I do think it works to scare you as a kid, and even as an adult, they're kind of crazy. They don't really even speak, and they're memorable almost entirely because of the movement, and they're kind of like this evil force throughout the movie. And then we keep moving forward, and the plot and the horror keeps upping. We have Princess Mombi, who literally collects human heads. They're not like wigs or masks. They're literally just heads kept in a cabinet, which when you're 6 years old is horrifying. And even as an adult, the concept is a little bit unsettling. Then we even get to the Gnome King at the end. He's a little bit less scary, but the concept of this rock monster mountain it could be scary for some. But that makes us ask, why was this movie even made? Was it trying to be disturbing on purpose? And no, it wasn't really trying to be edgy. A lot of people assume Disney just went completely off the rails, but most of these bizarre ideas, like the Wheelers, Princess Mommy, the Gnome King, they actually come straight from L. Frank Baum's books. And there's a ton of these books, and I can get into them maybe in the future. I haven't read all of them. I've read maybe the first three or so when I was younger, and they are completely different than the Wizard of Oz movies, like with Judy Garland that we grew up watching. Um, so in some ways, Return to Oz might be a more faithful adaptation, slightly. And it just turns out that the original Oz stories are just absolutely terrifying. Rewatching this movie as an adult, I actually appreciate it a lot more. I think it's really creative and ambitious, and it's unlike most things I feel like Disney has put out. But if someone asked me whether I'd show it to a 6-year-old today, I'd have to maybe think about. I'd probably show it to them. Come on, they need a little scare in their life. But somehow this was, being marketed right next to films like The Little Mermaid, and if that wasn't enough childhood trauma, don't worry, we're just getting started. If you grew up in the 80s or even the 90s, this movie probably holds a special place in your heart. I remember watching the whole series and loving it. I particularly like the third one. I don't know if that's controversial or not, but yeah, the NeverEnding Story franchise is imaginative, beautiful. The music is iconic, and I think Falcor is still one of the coolest fantasy creatures ever. And on the surface, it's exactly the kind of magical adventure every kid dreams about. But underneath all of that, the never-ending story is surprisingly dark. All right, let's get right at it. Let's talk about the horse in the swamp. If you've seen this movie, you already know where this is going. If you haven't, well, I'm kind of sorry because this is so sad and intense. This scene is 100% one of the most devastating things you probably saw as a kid. It's slow. There's no like dramatic villain or a huge battle. It's just a child who's desperately trying to save his best friend and failing at that. And the thing that makes this even more intense is it's not just because the mud is so stickly or it's just too much mud. It's because he's actually overwhelmed by despair. The swamp is literally feeding off of their hopelessness. And as a kid, I don't think I fully understood what that even meant. I just knew this wasn't how movies were supposed to work. The hero wasn't supposed to lose his best friend, and the horse definitely was not supposed to die. And yet, that's exactly what happened. There's also the concept in this film of the nothing. Honestly, I think this might be one of the most terrifying concepts in any children's movie because it really isn't a monster. It's nothing you can punch, nothing you can outrun. It's simply nothingness, an emptiness that slowly consumes everything. And because of this nothingness, entire kingdoms disappear, people disappear, ideas disappear, hope. As a kid, it's scary because everything keeps vanishing. As an adult, it's scary for completely different reasons. Rewatching this film now, what surprises me isn't how scary it is. It's how much faith it has in children, in the audience that it was made for. It trusts kids to wrestle with grief, failure, depression, meaning, hope. These are enormous ideas for kids, and somehow they're wrapped inside a fantasy movie with a lucky dragon. Maybe that's why people still talk about it 40 years later, but for me, I truly think these movies are great. And the first one set us off on the right track, and it tackles some big themes that I think even some adults have issues grappling with. So, would I show this to a younger kid? I probably would. I think Yes, it might create some childhood trauma, but it just prepares you for reality in a way. So by now, you may have noticed there is a pattern in these films. None of these movies are straight out horror films. None of them were marketed as terrifying. Sometimes they're musicals, fantasy adventure, maybe an animated classic or a family drama, and yet people are still talking about them today for one very specific reason. They've all crossed a line that many modern family movies would never do. Often this line was crossed intentionally and often accidentally, though. But before we talk about why, we have one more nightmare to revisit. Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. This movie is crazy. I just rewatched it and I missed a lot of this when I was a kid. Like, I didn't even realize it was them just telling a story to each other about what was happening. I thought this was all happening. It was all reality. But if you've never seen Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, on the surface, it looks completely harmless. There's a flying car, catchy soundtrack, Dick Van Dyke, what's not to love? Then, about halfway through, the movie introduces one of the creepiest characters ever put into a family film, the child catcher. Yes, old Jeffrey Epstein himself makes appearance in this film, and he is kidnapping children left and right, and he has a big net and other ways to catch these kids, and it's horrifying. He looks scary. I don't really even know where to begin. The makeup on him is horrifying. Um, it's just an unsettling smile throughout the film. He does this strange little dance as he walks through town, and then his voice, yeah, no, absolutely not. As a kid, the character felt like pure evil, stranger danger, stay away. He was scary not because he had, magical powers and not because he looked like some monster, but because it kind of felt realistic, kind of felt possible. Even today, he's regularly listed as one of the most frightening villains in a children's film. And honestly, I get it. He's still horrifying to me. And despite that, yeah, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang is a fun movie. I would definitely still show it to a kid, but that scene with the child catcher is horrifying. If the movie didn't have the happy ending that it did, it would be, I don't know, it'd be a tough watch for sure because a lot of when you see all these kids in hiding too, like later, the whole group of them, it's absolutely kind of heartbreaking that they have to live this way for this evil king who's ruling this kingdom of Bulgaria. Now, this last film, I think is definitely more traumatizing than horrifying, and that is Bridge to Terabithia. I think this movie traumatized people for a completely different reason than the other films I have talked about because it tricked us. If you only watch the trailers, this looked kind of like a Chronicles of Narnia kind of movie. A fantasy adventure film, with a secret kingdom, monsters, epic battles. Instead, those fantasy scenes are really just glimpses into the imagination of two kids who are trying to make sense of the world around them. And before you even realize what kind of story you're actually watching, everything changes and it is devastating. I will say I almost certainly only watched this movie as a kid because I thought I could look like Josh Hutcherson because I also had a bowl cut at the time. So I saw myself in him for some reason. But this movie is so devastating. If you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't seen it, I don't want to ruin one of the most emotionally powerful moments in filmmaking that I had as a kid. So maybe you should go watch it. What I will say is that this movie forces both its main character and its audience to experience grief on another level. It's not through fantasy, it's not a metaphor. It's very real and grounded. And for many kids, this was the first movie that ever showed death, especially happening to a child. Something that a lot of movies would find taboo. That's not something that's presented in a lot of films. And there's no magical way to undo it. There's no miracle, no resurrection, no last minute rescue. It's just painful loss. Looking back, I think that's exactly why this movie has endured for so long, is because it trusted children with difficult emotions. It believed young people were capable of feeling heartbreak and growing from it, and that's an incredibly risky thing for a family movie to do, but it's also incredibly honest. And there's been plenty of movies that have done this before. This is the first one that stood out to me, but you can even talk about a film like My Girl, which is equally devastating in similar way. When I first started revisiting these films and putting this list together, I thought I was making a video just about like scary childhood movies, but somewhere along the way I realized that's not really what connects these films. Yes, they're frightening, they're sad, some of them are genuinely nightmare fuel. Some of them will make you cry or leave you emotionally wrecked for years to come. But that's not why we still remember them. The real connection is that they all respected children enough to tell a difficult story. Think about it. Return to Oz asked children to confront fear. The NeverEnding Story asked them to confront things like despair. Chitty Chitty Bang Bang kind of shows us what our vulnerability is as children, that adults can do bad things to us. Whereas Bridge to Terabithia ask young audiences to process a grief that they very well could experience in their young life. None of these are easy subjects, but instead of pretending these emotions didn't exist, these movies embrace them. And yeah, modern films for families, they're not the same way anymore. Some of them do go into these more intense topics, but for a lot of them, I feel like they do shy away from difficult things. There are still fantastic movies being made, but I do think something has changed. Older children's films often seemed willing to make kids uncomfortable, not just for shock value, but because growing up is uncomfortable. Fear, loss, loneliness, death, these aren't just adult emotions. Even children can experience them. As kids, we watched these movies wishing they were less scary, and maybe even as adults, we talk about them to our friends like, that's crazy that we watched that. But for some of us, I think we do appreciate them because they didn't talk down to us. They assumed we could handle difficult ideas. And sometimes they were maybe wrong, but I'm still glad that I watched them as a kid. And for me, a lot of these stories will never be forgotten. They will cling to me more than any of the more modern movies I've seen because I watched them at a vulnerable age. And honestly, I do think that is a incredible legacy to have as a filmmaker. So now I do want to hear from you. What movie absolutely terrified you as a kid that probably wasn't supposed to, or maybe it was? Let me know in the comments because I have a feeling this list is only scratching the surface. I know there is so many more horrifying films that were supposed to just be for children. And if you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing. I've got a lot more strange stories from movies, history, and internet culture coming soon. And thanks for watching. Love you guys.